Welcome to our deep dive,
Yep.
into this fascinating world of the human nervous system. We're going to be exploring this incredible network that allows us to, you know, sense the world, think and feel and move.
Mm.
Um,
It's pretty amazing, right? I mean, how much is going on beneath the surface?
it really is. So we're going to be using excerpts from a biology textbook as our guide,
Yeah.
so we can really get a good grasp on how this intricate system works.
Yeah.
So to start with the basics, what exactly is the nervous system made up of?
Well, imagine the nervous system as this vast communication network with two main branches. The central nervous system is like the main headquarters,
Right.
consisting of the brain and spinal cord.
Mhm.
And then we have the peripheral nervous system, which branches out from there, carrying messages to and from, every single part of your body.
Okay, so the central nervous system is like the command center,
Exactly.
and the peripheral nervous system is like the messengers.
Exactly. And just like any, efficient communication network, the nervous system has different divisions with specialized roles.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's talk about the autonomic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system. It's responsible for all those automatic functions. You don't even have to think about like your heart beating, your lungs breathing, and your stomach digesting food.
Wow, so it's working 24/7 even when we're asleep.
Exactly. It's
Uh,
like your body's autopilot, constantly making adjustments to keep everything running smoothly.
That's incredible. Now, what about the other part of the peripheral nervous system?
That's called the somatic nervous system, and it's involved in your voluntary movements and your interactions with the outside world. So it's what allows you to, reach for your textbook, turn the pages, and even take notes.
Okay, so the somatic nervous system is all about conscious control.
Precisely. And it's also responsible for reflexes, those lightning-fast responses that protect you from harm. Remember that time you accidentally touched a hot stove?
Oh yeah, I pulled my hand back so fast I didn't even have time to think about it.
Exactly. That's a reflex in action. The signal travels from your hand to your spinal cord and right back to your muscles, causing you to pull away before your brain even registered the pain.
Wow, so the spinal cord can make decisions on its own.
Well, not exactly decisions. Think of it more like a superhighway for nerve impulses. It can relay signals very quickly, allowing for these rapid automatic responses that are essential for survival.
So the brain isn't always involved in every single action?
Not always. In the case of reflexes, the spinal cord acts as a kind of shortcut, allowing for super fast responses that don't require conscious thought.
That's fascinating. Okay, so we've talked about the central and peripheral nervous systems. What about the cells that make up this incredible network? I remember learning about neurons, but I could use a refresher.
Neurons are the building blocks of the nervous system responsible for transmitting information throughout your body. Think of them as tiny messengers carrying electrical and chemical signals from one part of your body to another.
So they're like the postal service of the body, delivering messages all over the place.
That's a great analogy. And just like a postal worker needs a way to transport the mail, neurons have these long arm-like extensions called axons that carry signals away from the cell body.
Okay, so the axons are like the delivery trucks of the nervous system.
Exactly. And to receive messages, neurons have these branch-like extensions called dendrites.
So the dendrites are like the mailboxes waiting for incoming signals.
You got it. And the place where one neuron connects with another to pass along a message is called a synapse. It's like a tiny meeting point where information is exchanged.
This is all starting to make sense.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about how these signals actually travel through the nervous system. It seems like there's more to it than just simple electricity.
You're right. It's a fascinating combination of electrical and chemical processes. Are you ready to dive a little deeper into how neurons communicate?
Absolutely. Let's unravel the mysteries of these tiny messengers.
Okay, so let's picture a single neuron just hanging out ready to receive a message. Even when it's at rest, it's maintaining what we call a resting potential.
Resting potential. So even when we're like chilling out, our neurons are still hard at work.
Exactly. The resting potential is like a baseline state where the inside of the neuron has a slightly negative charge, compared to the outside. Think of it like a battery that's, charged up and ready to go.
Okay, so there's this electrical difference across the neuron's membrane.
Yeah.
But how does that actually translate into a signal being sent?
Well, when a neuron receives a strong enough stimulus, say from another neuron or a sensory receptor, it triggers what we call an action potential.
Action potential.
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay, you got my attention. Tell me more about this action potential.
Imagine you're watching a line of dominoes fall. When a neuron is stimulated, channels in its membrane open up, allowing these positively charged ions to rush in. This causes a rapid change in the electrical charge, like a domino tipping over.
So the neuron goes from negative to positive in an instant.
Precisely. And this change in charge, this action potential, travels down the neuron's axon like a wave carrying the signal to the next neuron in line.
So it's like a chain reaction with each domino or neuron passing the signal along.
What?
But hold on a second. You mentioned earlier that neurons don't actually touch each other.
Right.
There are those tiny gaps called synapses, right?
That's right. And that brings us to how the signal actually jumps across those gaps.
Yeah, they can't just magically teleport, can it?
You're right, it can't. In a synapse, the electrical signal triggers the release of special chemical messengers called neurotransmitters.
Okay.
These neurotransmitters are like tiny boats that ferry the signal across the river of the synapse to the next neuron.
So it's like a relay race. The electrical signal runs down the axon and then passes the baton, the neurotransmitter, to the next neuron across the synapse.
Exactly. And these neurotransmitters are incredibly important because they can have either excitatory or inhibitory effects on the receiving neuron.
Excitatory or inhibitory, what does that mean?
Well, an excitatory neurotransmitter makes the receiving neuron more likely to fire its own action potential, continuing the signal. It's like giving the neuron a little nudge to keep the message going.
Okay, so it's like saying, hey, wake up. This message is important. Pass it on.
Exactly. Now, an inhibitory neurotransmitter does the opposite. It makes the receiving neuron less likely to fire, essentially putting the brakes on the signal.
So it's like saying, hold on, let's calm down for a second before we send this message any further. I'm starting to see how complex this communication system really is.
It is. And the balance between excitatory and inhibitory signals is crucial for how our nervous system functions. It's like a delicate dance with neurons constantly sending and receiving messages, influencing each other's activity.
Wow, it's amazing how much is happening at the microscopic level. But I have one more question about those neurotransmitters. What happens to them after they've delivered their message? Do they just hang out in the synapse forever?
That's a great question. Actually, neurotransmitters have to be cleared out of the synapse to make way for the next signal. They're either broken down by enzymes or reabsorbed by the sending neuron, a process called reuptake.
Okay, so it's like a recycling system. The neurotransmitters are carefully collected and either reused or disposed of.
Precisely. Now, all this intricate communication is what allows us to experience the world around us through our senses.
Ah, the senses. We've been talking about how the nervous system sends signals, but how does it receive information in the first place? I mean, how do we see, hear, taste, smell, and touch?
All of our senses rely on specialized cells called sensory receptors, which are like tiny translators that convert stimuli from the environment into electrical signals that the nervous system can understand.
Okay, so we have different sensory receptors for each of our senses.
Yes.
That makes sense. But how do these receptors actually turn things like light and sound into those signals?
It's a process called transduction. Sensory receptors take the energy of a stimulus, whether it's light, sound, pressure, or chemicals, and convert it into electrical signals that can be transmitted to the brain.
So transduction is like the nervous system's universal language.
Exactly. It's how our brain makes sense of the world around us.
So let's say I'm looking at a beautiful flower. How do my eyes, my sensory receptors, turn that visual information into signals that my brain can interpret?
Well, light from the flower enters your eyes and is focused onto the retina, which is this light-sensitive layer at the back of your eye. The retina contains millions of photoreceptor cells called rods and cones.
I've heard of rods and cones before, but I always get them mixed up. Can you remind me what they do?
Of course, rods are responsible for our vision in low-light conditions, allowing us to see shapes and movement. Cones, on the other hand, are responsible for our color vision and our ability to see fine detail.
Ah, so that's why we can't see colors as well in dim light. It's because our rods are doing most of the work, and they're not as good at picking up colors.
Exactly. Now, when light strikes the rods and cones, it triggers a chemical reaction that generates electrical signals. These signals are then transmitted to the brain via the optic nerve, where they're interpreted as the images we see.
Wow, that's incredible. It's amazing how our eyes can capture the beauty of a flower and send that information all the way to our brains, allowing us to experience that moment.
It truly is. And it's just one example of how our sensory receptors work in conjunction with the nervous system to create our perception of the world.
So what about our other senses? How do they work?
Well, our ears contain tiny hair cells that vibrate in response to sound waves, sending signals to the brain through the auditory nerve. Our sense of touch relies on a variety of mechanoreceptors in our skin that detect pressure, temperature, and pain. And our senses of taste and smell rely on chemoreceptors that detect specific chemicals in food and in the air.
It's incredible to think that our bodies are constantly bombarded with all this sensory information. It's like a symphony of signals, all orchestrated by the nervous system. But all those signals have to go somewhere, right? Tell me more about the brain. So all those signals from our senses have to go somewhere, right? Tell me more about the brain.
Yeah, the brain is like the ultimate destination for all that sensory information. It's like, a supercomputer that processes, interprets, and stores everything we experience.
Okay. I remember learning that the brain is divided into different regions, each with its own special function. Can you remind me about that?
Absolutely. Let's start with the cerebrum, which is the largest part of the brain, and it's responsible for, our higher level thinking, consciousness, personality.
The cerebrum, that's the one with all the folds and wrinkles, right?
Yeah.
I remember seeing pictures of it, and it looks almost like a walnut.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Those folds and wrinkles called gyri and sulci actually increase the surface area of the cerebrum, allowing for more neurons and connections.
So it's like packing more processing power into a smaller space. Pretty efficient design, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is. And the outer layer of the cerebrum is called the cerebral cortex. It's divided into four lobes, each with its own, specialized functions.
I vaguely remember learning about the four lobes, but I could definitely use a refresher.
Okay, let's imagine the brain as a team of experts, each with their own area of expertise. The frontal lobe is like the executive decision maker responsible for planning, problem solving, controlling our impulses. It also plays a key role in, our personality and social behavior.
So the frontal lobe is like the CEO of the brain, making the big decisions and keeping everything running smoothly.
Exactly. Now, the parietal lobe is like the sensory information specialist. It receives input from our senses, helping us, understand where our body is in space and how to interact with the world around us.
So if I close my eyes and reach for my textbook, the parietal lobe is helping me know where my hand is in relation to the book.
Precisely. Now imagine you're listening to your favorite music, that's the temporal lobe, hard at work processing auditory information and helping you understand language. It also plays a crucial role in forming new memories.
Okay, so the temporal lobe is like the brain's DJ and historian, keeping the music playing and the memories flowing.
I like that analogy. And finally, we have the occipital lobe, which is located at the back of the brain and is all about vision. It receives signals from your eyes and processes them into the images we see.
Wow. So each lobe has its own unique role, but they must all work together in some way, right?
Absolutely. They're constantly communicating with each other, exchanging information, coordinating their activities. It's a remarkable symphony of neural activity.
It's truly amazing how all of this is happening inside our heads all the time. But what about memories? How are they formed and where are they stored?
Well, memory is a complex process that involves multiple parts of the brain, but the hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure in the temporal lobe, plays a key role in forming new memories.
The hippocampus, I remember reading about that. It's like the brain's librarian organizing and storing our memories.
Exactly. The hippocampus receives information from different parts of the brain and helps consolidate those experiences into long-term memories. These memories are then distributed throughout the cortex for storage.
So it's not like our memories are all stored in one specific file cabinet. They're more like a network of interconnected files spread throughout the brain.
That's a great way to think about it. And the amazing thing is that the brain is constantly changing and adapting, strengthening some connections while weakening others based on our experiences.
So every new experience, every new piece of information we encounter literally shapes our brains.
That's right. And that's why it's so important to keep our brains active and engaged throughout our lives. Learning new things, challenging ourselves mentally, and staying socially connected can all help to promote brain health and protect against cognitive decline.
So it's not just about building muscle, it's about building brain power too. This deep dive into the nervous system has been absolutely fascinating. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the complexity and wonder of this incredible system. Thank you so much for taking us on this journey.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.